Now, I'm going to start by saying something that I think many objectivists would actually agree with. And I'll probably receive a standing ovation at this point, and then we can just pack up and leave and have gin and tonics or something like that. We conservatives, we aren't actually that clever. Now, what I mean by that is that many of us don't have degrees. Many of us voted for Brexit, God forbid. Many of us quite like our Queen and our country. There are various character traits or indeed flaws that many amongst the sort of uneducated elite would turn their noses up at. And I guess I'm one of them. And I'm not for a second going to suggest that I'm the most educated man in this room. I was going to say room, virtual room this evening, but here we go. I will do my best to make a case for conservatism, or at least, as the late and great Sir Roger Scruton once called it, the philosophy of love, which is a line I like a lot. Now, I was thinking about the question, conservatism, good or bad, today. And I think it's essential to actually define what we mean by conservatism, because I imagine this is where we're going to have some disagreements. First of all, I don't think it's fair to dismiss conservatism as being some kind of reactionary dismissal of anything to do with change, right? A sort of self-described conservative doesn't hiss like a cat that's just had its tail stood on at the changing of, I don't know, a battery pack or something, because we quite like the old batteries that powered our television remote better. And I think on conservatism, more fundamentally, and focusing more on Rand in particular, Rand was quoted as saying that there's nothing left to conserve because basically the status quo is now all, collectivism. I actually don't accept that there's nothing left to conserve. I actually think there's an awful lot left to conserve, and God help us in doing so, because we humans, I think, naturally have an instinct to preserve that which we love, which we respect, which we cherish from the past, and care for the familiar, of course, as well. Mistrusting change for change's sake. And I think modern conservatism that does believe in a market economy, that can point to all of the evidence looking back on private property and markets that have generally produced, I think, prosperity and preserved freedom, and make a case indeed for the state to actually have an albeit limited role in ensuring law and order, in protecting individuals in their privacy and activities against things like fraud and theft and all these other things. But I think where I potentially will continue to diverge from your own is my view that community, shared identity in this country, of course, I'm not suggesting we should do that in America, but monarchy and institutions like it are crucial. They're as crucial to me as pound and pence or dollar and nickels. And I think that liberalism is experiencing here in placing economic growth above all else, as it has done for years and years now, as the best route to sort of grow the economic pie that we all enjoy so we can spend more money on all the things that we all like. I think there was this sort of shrug your shoulders like acceptance that, oh, it'll all be fine. Pro-market conservatism bet on the sort of persistence of moral values to act as almost a bulwark against the disruption of an ever-changing market economy. But I'm afraid that it simply hasn't followed through like that. There's been a hollowing out of many of communities, and I think the sort of loss of faith has been corrosive for shared values, morality, society, and the institutions that I just mentioned earlier. I think I look around communities like this one, for example, and I very much feel the effects of that for your own. This is quite a working class area in the northeast of England. And I think here and in the United States, we're constantly asking these existential questions about who we are and what our values are. And we wouldn't actually, I think it's probably fair to say that we are at each other's throats at the minute, like you wouldn't believe. Tribal, you mentioned in your very kind opening remarks there, that I've been under investigation by the police. Yes, vexatious political people who don't like your political speech, they'll come for you with vexatious claims to police officers. They'll come for you through the law. They'll come for you in whatever way they can. They'll try and have you lose your job through your employer and things like that. I think we're living through, despite peaceful and tolerant times across the West, we're sliding in with a sort of civilization under threat, in my view. There are movements to pull down statues, to destroy those we disagree with, as I say, to assume that 14 million Conservative Party voters or 17.4 million Brexit voters are inherently wicked because you disagree with their democratic decision. These sort of things suggest to me that we've never needed to look back more to actually take the steps and leap forward. And that's why I think conservatism has to act as that bulwark, as I mentioned, against those who just want to sort of destroy rather than build or protect. It's the same sort of policy platform, the same looking back, that retrospective approach that actually enabled us to resist the arguments of, I don't know, the French Revolution or Oswald Mosley and his British Union of Fascists, or Maoism, and even, thanks be to God, Jeremy Corbynism. Thank God for that. Because political conservatism, I think, is here ultimately to conserve a process. A process of change, not an outcome, right? It's a sort of steady as she goes. Are we sure we want to do this? No, but, really, guys, let's think about this. And I think if only the UK Conservative Party agreed with me on all of that, then it wouldn't perhaps, and I think we will agree on this, they wouldn't put forward asphyxiating net zero targets, sort of arbitrary targets of achieving net zero by 2050 in the name of environmentalism. I think conservatism has to actually be a little bit more robust than it is being currently. I think it's right to be cautious. I think it's right to not be as exciting as billboards with clenched fists reading the word resist. We're not as exciting as that on the conservative side of the argument. If I had a billboard right now, it would probably just read steady, which is slightly boring, I will admit. But my God, I think it's necessary at this juncture. And I think there's actually a lot that, especially with the proposition, there's a lot that objectivists and conservatives should be agreed on, right? We should be agreed that the divides as far as free speech is concerned and in learning the lessons of our past are important as far as speech and debate's concerned, as far as those fundamental questions of the cancel culture that we're experiencing across the West. I think where we'll potentially diverge again is my view that a sort of meaningful life must entail necessary prerequisites of community, personal morality. I think a sense of a higher purpose or mission and care for others have got to come into it. And I guess I hark back to someone like Adam Smith, the father, as you were, maybe even the grandfather at this point, great-great-grandfather, who knows, of the sort of modern market economy, who was equally interested in morality as I am, I think. He reckoned that you could only sustain it by a sense of responsibility. Then you've got the likes of Edmund Burke saying that actually liberty is fantastic, absolutely my cup of tea, but it only makes sense when it's coupled with moral and accountable individuals. And I think liberalism, my concern is that liberalism and those values reflected in the Enlightenment and ultimately enshrined in that most important of constitutions, the American Constitution, can only exist really when married with the kind of values that we once had to fix the sort of God-shaped hole in our lives and look to be increasingly, I guess, common in liberal societies, that we've been hollowed out in that sense. And I think with a rush to fill that hole with the kind of activism of radical movements, to find something bigger than yourself, I think there's a real crisis of belonging across the West. You've got groups like Black Lives Matter, you've got Extinction Rebellion, you've even got Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. There ought to have been, I think, a recognition that there has been in communities up and down the UK for this idea that actually it's quite important to remember home and place, for the rule of law, for places that place the country as its icon. And I do doubt at this point that there won't be a little bit of eye rolling from any of the objectivists watching right now. But I think it's essential to make that case and put that forward, especially post-Brexit in a post-Trump world. Your Honour, I don't mean to trigger you with the use of Trump's name, but in which we conservatives are sort of dismissed with some ism or some phobia. You know, if I say I believe in Brexit, they say, well, you're clearly racist. You're clearly all of the, if you believe in biological sex, you're clearly transphobic. Those sort of things, I think, are where there should be agreement with objectivism. And I think I would robustly argue that there can be no more valiant a case than, and I think Ayn Rand potentially herself explicitly said that it's, you know, rationally selfish to be willing to die for your freedom because of the importance of living in, as opposed to being, you know, a slave essentially. And I think there is that tension between conservatives and those interested in getting to know things and those who want to change things. I think the former, getting to know things, helps you look back at the past and see what's been helpful and what's been valuable and the best route forward in defending freedom. That's what I would urge everyone to do right now. You know, an example would be how we've taken for granted the role of language and gendered terms for men and women. Gone are such things. And with it, by the way, we see today in the UK press, there are stories about how male-born sex offenders who identify as women can be treated on female-only NHS wards, or male-born weightlifters can compete with women at the Olympics on a playing field that's certainly anything but level. And I think looking back through history, it would be difficult to not, I think, come away with an almost jealous stance on guarding our language, and beautiful as it is, because of the way in which we've come to, as a society, build ourselves around this language. These people are trying to fundamentally alter society through words, in my opinion. So yes, conservatism, I think, is indeed the right choice for defending freedom, in my opinion. It might not have slogans as exciting as, I don't know, give me liberty or give me death, or, you know, of resisting capitalism. But my God, in an age of unreason, in an age when I think we could do with a little more reasoning, it's record of conservatism throughout history, I think, is infinitely better than that of the visionaries who have sought perfection here on earth.